6 questions, 6 knives stabbing into the buried truth beneath the perfect facade of a peaceful departure. But no departure is peaceful when the hand of the hidden one still lurks somewhere, between pieces that never quite fit together, between final breaths that no one truly hears. Gene Hackman is gone, but these 6 questions still await answers. From the bright lights of red carpet premieres to the post-Oscar parties that lasted until dawn, Gene Hackman once had it all. The privileges of an A-list star, a man who held 2 prestigious Oscars, one of the rare few to reach the pinnacle without compromising to any hidden powers. But behind that dazzling glory was a Gene Hackman quietly shutting doors, pushing away all of Hollywood's flashy invitations, and rejecting everything people called glory. If you're curious about the story of Gene Hackman and the secrets of Hollywood, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video with friends who might be interested. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next exciting and surprising stories. Now, let's dive into this fascinating story. By the late 1980s, when his career reached its peak with Mississippi Burning and Unforgiven, Gene Hackman began distancing himself from major events, award headlines, and the photos with colleagues over glasses of sparkling champagne. All of it had become luxury items Hackman no longer cared for. Hollywood had no loyalty, no conscience, only an insatiable hunger for profit. That sharp declaration wasn't a hasty remark, but the pinnacle of what he had seen, lived through, and absorbed into every fiber of his being during decades of struggle between the flashbulbs and the calculations behind the scenes. Hackman wasn't born to be an idol. He bluntly admitted that he never felt comfortable stepping onto a stage to accept an award. The way hands patted his back, the fake smiles exchanged behind the velvet curtains, the congratulatory handshakes that followed, each one felt like an unforgiving stab in the back. It all disgusted him. There's a story Hackman once told a close friend, that right after receiving his first Oscar for his role in The French Connection, he removed the bow from the statue and threw it straight into the trash can in the men's restroom of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. His frustration didn't erupt in a few fleeting moments. It was the culmination of decades of dissatisfaction. From the moment Hackman entered the industry with a simple dream of living his passion for acting, he once said, "I didn't come here to be famous, I came here to work." But he soon realized that Hollywood didn't exist to nurture passion. It existed to devour any soul that dared to dream too much of fairness or pure art. For a long time, Hackman became a thorn in the side of the hidden powers in Hollywood. He turned down lucrative contracts, refused to attend lavish fundraising events, and even bluntly rejected an invitation to join the Academy. Hollywood was a massive trap where the weak were willing to betray each other just to survive a few more seasons. So, Hackman chose a nearly unheard-of path, severing all ties with power, shutting the door on the media, and retreating to live a secluded life in New Mexico with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, the only woman in his life who had never betrayed his faith in kindness. Even as Hackman tried to sever all ties with Hollywood, he couldn't escape the stalking presence behind him. Calls from famous directors, scripts sent to his home, even though no one knew his exact address, everything felt like ghosts clinging to his life, reminding him that no one could truly escape Hollywood's control. And the worst of it all, the thing that smoldered and consumed the work Hackman had tried to protect for decades, were the secrets he was forced to keep. Secrets about the backstage parties, the covert deals between powerful producers and young stars willing to do anything to step onto the red carpet. Hackman knew, and he hated himself for staying silent. So, in his final days, when sharp pains in his chest forced him to confront the limits of life, Hackman broke the vow of silence he had kept for nearly half a century. What he said became the first piece in the horrifying puzzle of Hollywood that he had witnessed. Unlike his cool, hardened persona on screen, Gene Hackman in real life was a smoldering fire, ready to ignite whenever he faced something that didn't sit right with him. That fire burned its fiercest on the set of The French Connection in 1971, where Hackman took on the role of Jimmy Popeye Doyle, the character that cemented his legacy. But behind the film's raw, gritty realism was a period of intense tension, one that pitted the lead actor against a powerful film crew, turning the set into a silent battlefield. Director William Friedkin was a towering name in the industry, but his working style was a nightmare for anyone who refused to submit. Known for his ruthless directing methods, Friedkin pushed actors to their absolute physical and mental limits to capture raw, authentic performances. But for Hackman, the battle wasn't just with an unforgiving director. It was with an unseen force lurking behind the camera, a presence more powerful than anything on set. From his earliest days on set, Hackman could feel the eyes watching him, not just from the production team, but from somewhere else. There were private calls, subtle offers from men he had never met before. They didn't discuss scripts, acting, or anything artistic. Instead, they laid out conditions, terms in exchange for invisible support, the kind of backing that could make or break a career. Later, Hackman would call it the dirty deal behind the scenes. During a late-night shoot, with the entire crew exhausted, Hackman stepped backstage to catch his breath in the dimly lit corner behind the studio, where the streetlights cast an eerie glow. That's when he overheard it, a brief, hushed conversation between the producer and an unfamiliar man. The whispers blended with cigarette smoke, but Hackman heard enough. His role, the next awards, even the trajectory of his career, it had all been arranged in advance. "We need a fresh face, but one we can control." The voice was so cold it sent chills down Hackman's spine. By morning, his pent-up fury exploded. He confronted Friedkin and the producer directly, but the only response he received was weak smiles and defiant stares. That was the moment Hackman realized. In this game, actors weren't artists. They were pawns. The scenes he filmed weren't just for audiences. They were tools, pieces in a much larger scheme unfolding behind the curtain. From that moment on, Hackman refused all private meetings with producers and avoided exclusive parties where secret deals were disguised as friendly exchanges. He knew that stepping through those doors meant paying a price, not just with his career, but with his soul. Few people knew that Hackman was offered leading roles in at least 3 blockbuster films of the 1970s, all of which later won Oscars. He turned them all down, not because of the scripts, but because each offer came with a list of non-artistic conditions. Private dinners with industry power players, undated contracts filled with vague clauses about promotional opportunities, and worst of all, demands that could never be put in writing. Demands so infuriating that Hackman reportedly tore a script apart the moment he finished reading it. There was an industry rumor, one Hackman never confirmed but had circulated for years, that he had witnessed a secret deal to rig the Oscars. A powerful producer quietly negotiating with an Academy media representative, not about the quality of a film, but about a post-award publicity package that would guarantee the win had nothing to do with merit. From that moment on, Hackman never believed in the Oscar campaign again. To him, the Golden Statue wasn't a reward for art. It was a trophy earned through handshakes in the shadows. And as the whispers echoed through the studio that year, night after night, Hackman knew he no longer belonged there. In the small seaside room in Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman spent his final years avoiding the noise of the world, an old phone rang deep into the night. On the other end was a familiar voice, his closest friend for decades, the only person Hackman still trusted enough to share the truths he had buried since his youth. But this time, Hackman wasn't calling to reminisce. The stories he called to confess. Hackman's voice was hoarse, each word slicing through the air like a blade. He began with a sentence as cold as the night wind slipping through a cracked window. "We sold our souls for fame, and I can't die with this weight on my shoulders." Outside, the New Mexico sky was pitch black, but the real darkness filled the room where Hackman sat. No lights, unlike usual. The whiskey on the table held nothing but the memories he had tried to bury for over half a century. Now they were rising like a flood, unstoppable. Hackman recounted it slowly, as if each word was a stone pressing against his chest. He spoke of a night in 1974, inside a Beverly Hills mansion, not just a gathering of A-list stars, but a room filled with powerful figures from media, production, and politics. It wasn't just a party. It was the night Hackman was first inducted into the Inner Circle, a group of veteran actors canonized by Hollywood in the press. Yet behind the curtain, they guarded secrets that could never be spoken. According to Hackman, the Inner Circle wasn't some secret society with elaborate rituals or blood oaths. The vow was silence, a pact among those who had seen too much, who knew too much about the dark underbelly of the film capital. They were like survivors of a shipwreck, holding the truth about what caused the disaster, but forced into silence if they wanted to keep their lives and their careers. And the greatest secret Hackman carried throughout his life, the one that eroded his soul day by day, was the cover-up of Hollywood's most heinous crime. A child exploitation ring involving renowned filmmakers, celebrated actors, and the shadowy figures who pulled the strings behind awards, media, and the entire industry. In 1975, Hackman and a few familiar faces, once famous actors who had since faded from the limelight, were invited to a private party. They thought it was just another opportunity to network with power, but what happened behind those doors haunted Hackman for the rest of his life. Beyond the velvet curtain, inside a lavish room, was a scene he could never unsee. Children, too young to understand what was happening, being used as entertainment for men who called themselves moguls. The laughter, the applause, the firm handshakes after each exchange. Hackman took it all in, his eyes recording every detail, his heart freezing over like a sheet of black ice. The next day, Hackman and a few fellow actors found themselves plunged into a living hell they never saw coming. They were summoned to a sealed room and given two choices: sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for roles, fame, and safety, or speak up and watch their careers and possibly their lives vanish like dust. Hackman signed, not for fame, but because he understood that alone he couldn't fight the massive machine powered by money and influence. It wasn't just a confession, it was the tolling of a bell, swinging open the gates of hell, where Hollywood's dirtiest secrets waited to be exposed. The small wooden house in Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman spent his final years, quickly became the center of attention after news of his passing spread, but not because of curious locals or tabloid reporters. A different group arrived first, people who never stepped into the light. They didn't bring flowers, they didn't light candles, they came for the tapes. Those tapes had long been a whispered legend in private conversations among veteran actors. Those who knew Hackman understood his habit of recording, not for blackmail, not as a weapon against anyone, but simply to preserve living proof in case the truth ever needed to be exposed. Hackman called them his lifeline tapes, the only tether between him and his conscience. According to an anonymous insider, Hackman began this secret habit in the late 1980s, quietly recording phone calls with producers, negotiations over roles, veiled threats against young actors who refused to comply, and even off-the-record conversations between Hollywood's power brokers. He recorded everything. Each tape was a puzzle piece in what Hackman called the ugliest mosaic of power I've ever seen. Those tapes didn't just contain scattered voices, they were living proof of a system that had operated for decades. A system where prestigious awards weren't always given for talent, where faces suddenly vanished from the screen simply for saying no, and where child actors were forced to learn silence before they even knew the alphabet. Hackman once told a friend, "If you heard what I've heard, you'd never watch another Oscar night again." Now that Hackman was gone, so were the tapes. At the family's request, the Santa Fe police conducted a thorough search of the house, secret drawers, hidden compartments in bookshelves, even scanning every floor tile. No tapes, no cases. They had vanished without a trace. Hackman's family, especially his cousin who lived next door during his final 10 years, confirmed seeing old tape reels neatly stacked inside a worn leather suitcase. Hackman never explained them. He only gave one instruction. If anything happened, they were not to be opened. Instead, they were to contact a single name, a former friend who had never appeared in any public photographs. When the police opened Hackman's storage room, the suitcase was gone, without a trace, without a single note left behind. Someone had taken it. But the more terrifying question was, had Hackman managed to copy the tapes? And if so, where were they now? In the hands of an old colleague who stood on the same side? Locked away in the safe of a mysterious attorney in New York? Or had they already made their way to a newsroom, where journalists sat on a ticking time bomb, just waiting for the right moment to detonate? Some Hollywood insiders revealed that Hackman wasn't the only one who knew about the existence of the recordings. Certain directors, screenwriters, and even young actors who had been targeted in shadowy dealings were also aware, but no one dared to speak of them, because they understood that merely mentioning the missing tapes was the same as signing their own death sentence. If you find the story of Gene Hackman's life worth reflecting on, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. Next, let's dive into more thought-provoking stories about Gene Hackman. As the lights dimmed over the empty streets of Santa Fe, only questions lingered in the darkness. What fragments of truth had Hackman left behind? And who, or what force, held the power to decide whether those secrets would ever come to light? Hollywood remained silent as if nothing had ever happened, but those who knew Hackman understood. The tapes weren't lost. They were merely in hiding, waiting for a hand brave enough to pull back the curtain of truth. From the day he walked off his final film set, Gene Hackman chose a path few Hollywood icons ever dared to take, a path of complete isolation and solitude. Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its aid hills and blood-red sunsets, became his final refuge. A modest wooden house, no towering gates, no walls, no guards. Only the wind slicing through the cracks, as if every sound there conspired with the absolute silence. Hackman tried to move on, but even there, Hollywood never truly let him go. "You can leave Hollywood, but Hollywood will never leave you alone," he once said during a private meeting with a few old friends in 2005, a statement that would linger like a haunting curse. One of those present recalled that Hackman spoke with a quiet demeanor, but beneath the surface lay a smoldering fear, the fear of a man who had seen too much, knew too much, and carried secrets that were never meant to exist. In his early years in New Mexico, Hackman maintained sporadic contact with old friends, former colleagues, those who once stood on the same side, defending what they called the artistic conscience. But over time, everything faded. The phone stopped ringing, handwritten letters found no recipients, and Hackman, in some way, had pushed himself into complete isolation. He once joked to his cousin, "If one day I disappear, no one will know." But it wasn't just a joke, it was a premonition. It was this very cousin who, after Hackman's death, began experiencing strange occurrences for years. Mysterious cars parked at a distance, sometimes speeding off into the night with no one in sight. Eerie late-night calls with only the sound of faint breathing before abruptly hanging up, nameless letters containing only a few handwritten words. "We see you." Hackman never officially admitted he was being watched, but his cousin confirmed that he knew it well enough to always keep two suitcases in the house, one filled with personal belongings and the other with documents no one had ever seen. Hackman lived like an exile in his own home, always ready to leave everything behind and disappear if necessary. Why? Because of what he knew and what he carried with him in his final years. He rejected every invitation to return, no honorary Oscar, no Lifetime Achievement Award, no anniversary tributes, partly because he despised Hollywood's hypocrisy, but mostly because he knew that the moment he stepped beyond the safe confines of Santa Fe, the old hands wouldn't hesitate to reach out and squeeze the last breath from his throat. Some called Hackman paranoid, but those who sat with him in that wooden house heard the disjointed fragments, the late-night parties in Beverly Hills, the deals made behind closed doors, the young stars who never got their chance to shine. They knew Hackman wasn't delusional. He was simply the last of the few who had lived long enough to tell the story. But no one knows if those stories ever escaped Hackman's lips in time, or if they followed him into the abyss of eternal silence. Gene Hackman's final days were far from the peaceful twilight of a legendary figure enjoying his last years. Instead, they were suffocatingly tense, as if his final breaths were being choked away, each faint glimmer of daylight swallowed by the shadows of memories he could never erase. About 3 weeks before his death, his cousin noticed something unusual. Hackman, who had severed most ties with Hollywood long ago, was suddenly making calls. Not to younger colleagues, not to journalists who had once sought him out, but to a few old faces. Faces that belonged to a secret circle of silence, a pact Hackman had broken years ago. They were once allies, but now most had vanished. Not just from memory, but from life itself. More terrifying still, they had all died under strange circumstances. Midnight car crashes, fatal falls down their own staircases, or sudden, unexplained deaths in the lavish mansions of Beverly Hills. The deaths seemed random, but Hackman never believed in accidents in a world where men had sold their souls for glory. "I have no one left to talk to," he once mumbled, standing by his office window, his hand trembling as he gripped the old landline phone. Unanswered calls, voicemails that would never be returned, familiar voices, now silenced forever. In the desk drawer of Hackman's office after his death, a series of scattered notes lay written in shaky, uneven handwriting. No beginning, no end, just hurried fragments of an unfinished puzzle scribbled onto crumpled paper, but one line stood out. The same faces, the same hands, the same silence. That phrase echoed like a haunting refrain, repeated across multiple notes, as if Hackman was desperately etching a message for anyone curious enough to read and brave enough to understand. The same faces, the old faces, the ones who smiled beside him on the red carpet, and the ones who buried the careers and souls of those who dared to speak. The same hands, the hands that patted his back when he won awards, and the same hands that signed the orders to erase inconvenient witnesses. The same silence, the silence that has lasted for over half a century, shielding Hollywood's darkest secrets. Gene Hackman's death, when officially announced, had a neat and tidy cause, natural causes. A clean conclusion, leaving no loose ends for the curious to chase. But for those who understood the world Hackman had fled, natural had never existed. Was it truly the end? Or Hollywood's final warning to those who dared to break the rules? An old friend, one of the few survivors, spoke to the press after Hackman's funeral. Gene knew the rules. He knew them better than anyone. And he knew exactly what happens when you forget who makes them. Gene Hackman's story didn't end with a quiet grave in Santa Fe. It ended with the slam of an office door behind him. The first officer stepped into the wooden house, where a silent landline sat by the window, and beneath a drawer lay the final note, "I never wanted to survive." Gene Hackman closed his eyes, but his last words echoed, not as a farewell melody, but as a scream tearing through the glittering mask Hollywood used to hide its decaying conscience. That secret, who dares to hear it all? Those words did not come only from a man on the brink of leaving this world, but from the voice of a tormented conscience. He had lived a life of glory, yet one filled with regret and remorse. He had dedicated his entire existence to art, but the price he paid was wounds and loss. In his final moments, he could no longer remain silent. He had to speak the truth, even if it had the power to shake the world. Those who are left behind Will they dare to face it? Will they have the courage to hear it to the end, or will they choose to cover their ears, shut their eyes, and continue living in illusion and deceit? Gene Hackman was gone, but his words remained, a warning, a challenge, and perhaps the answer that would determine the fate of an entire industry. If you're surprised by the story of Gene Hackman and the secrets of Hollywood, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video with friends who might be interested. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.